Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Tom Geraghty, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks for having me.
It is a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the UK. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about goals and incentives from Cobra, Effect, and Perverse incentives. It's a lot of fun to be sitting down with you. And it's kind of funny, as we were talking in the pre-interview and prepping for this episode, we had a bit of a case of the Mondays and technology wasn't working. Finally, we got everything up and running, and now we're ready to have this conversation. I think goals and perverse incentives, it's a really fun conversation. And I think back to kind of my early graduate days, and I read this book by Gallup. We're having all these conversations. I'm in my organizational behavior class, and we're talking about motivation and all these sorts of things. And I read this book by Gallup titled First Break All the Rules. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but essentially it's about perverse incentives, about how you take something that's intrinsically motivating to somebody, you add an incentive to it, and all of a sudden it turns it from an intrinsic motivation to an extrinsic motivation, and it sucks the soul out of it. It takes something that someone would have already just naturally done because they love to do it, and now it makes it something that they don't want to do. And it was kind of this mind shift for me. I all of a sudden just realized, oh my gosh, I can see evidence of this throughout my life and throughout all different aspects of what I do, from work to home and everything. And all of a sudden, I realized the world is messed up. Like, we do this so much. And in the workplace, we do this so much. And so I've been on a mission ever since then to try to rid the workplace of these perverse incentives. Really, I think this is what we're going to be exploring together today. So as we get started, I wanted to share Tom's bio with everybody. Tom Geraghty is the CEO and founder of Psychological Safety, powered by Interim Ltd., is a trailblazer in the realm of psychological safety. With a diverse background that encompasses scientific research, technology, and leadership roles, Tom brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. His journey began as an experimentalist at Gillette Hills Syngenta, setting the stage for his unwavering commitment to pushing boundaries and fostering innovation. Really cool background. Anything you would like to share, Tom, by way of your background or personal context, a little bit more clarification as to your trajectory before we launch on into this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so and thanks so much for that. That's amazing. So my original background is as an ecologist, which is which is where I ended up at Gillette Hill Research Station, and my job title was experimentalist. And that's like that was my first job title, and it's kind of remained with me ever since, because it was also my coolest job title. So I continue to identify as an experimentalist, and through this career, I ended up in tech. Actually, ended up as CIO and CTO, and through that career, became really passionate about and remain passionate about creating the conditions in which people and teams can thrive and do our best work. And then at some point through that journey, I became aware of the term psychological safety back in about 2014, 2015. And that was my light bulb moment for me, right? That was a moment for me. And it's like, all this stuff we've been trying to do all along, all this good stuff, all this good practice, good team management, and everything around it. It's all fundamentally, the foundations of it all are psychological safety. So that's what we do for a living now. That's what I do for a living. And it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think so much of what we do in leadership, in the workplace, in trying to create an environment of motivation for those around us on our teams, it's built upon trust, right? Relationships are built upon trust. Teams are built upon trust, and trust is built upon this psychological safety. If you don't have safety, if people don't feel like they can be their true authentic selves, if they don't feel like they can raise concerns, if they don't feel like they can voice dissent, if they can't share out their ideas. If
Mm.
you can't do any of that, if you can't experiment and try new things, that means trust isn't there,
Yeah.
and that means you can't start to really lean into these different types of motivational types of environments to
Yeah.
create cool stuff,
Yeah.
creativity, innovation, all that kind of stuff, right? And
Exactly.
so it absolutely is essential. Trust, psychological safety goes hand in hand with creating inventive, yeah, high performing, innovative teams, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, on that point, that's an interesting point because I was talking to someone else this morning about that actually. Because psychological safety, yes, it's foundational to innovation and achieving great things and doing new things and trying new things out. It's also foundational to quality and expertise in roles that aren't at all innovative. They're
mhm.
roles that require sort of almost compliance and safety and
Yeah, yeah.
procedure and it's as important in the cockpit of a plane with a pilot as it is to a to a tech startup trying to release a new product to market in different ways, definitely, but like foundational to both.
Well, yeah, I would want a co-pilot to feel safe enough to challenge the pilot if they notice them doing something wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. Because like we even have stickers that say this, like, but we all make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. Human error is real, and it's only by talking about those mistakes and surfacing them and like pointing them out and trying to address them, but B, then learning from it and having those conversations that allow us to actually examine the causes of those mistakes so they don't happen again or we can mitigate them in the future. Yeah, it's super powerful.
Yeah, awesome. So psychological safety is key, foundational to having trust in our teams. Now let's talk a little bit more about these perverse incentives.
Mm.
As we were kind of framing up this episode and trying to think about, what would be the kind of the core to this conversation. One of the things I know you talk a lot about are these goals and incentives, the Cobra
Mm.
effect, perverse incentives. What do you mean by the Cobra effect? And
So yeah,
what are
go
the
on.
challenges with these perverse incentives?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I think that there's kind of so in respect to psychological safety, there are kind of two angles to take on this. One is that in a lot of this is where we started to get interested in it because in a lot of the teams that we've gone in to work with, we start to try and diagnose what's damaging psychological safety here.
Hmm.
What are the factors and behaviors and things that are preventing psychological safety from being as high as it could be. And as we peel layer after layer of the onion off and working things out, often there's there are some goals, metrics, or incentives that are incentivizing certain types of behavior that
Hmm.
then damage or inhibit psychological safety. And the most there are some quite complex and quite nuanced ways, but some of the most obvious are in sales teams, and where you've got
Yeah.
a sales team who are actually just a bunch of individual salespeople called a team because they do the same thing, right? But they're not actually working together as a team. They've been set individual targets and incentives that they could win and achieve even by taking sales off their teammate. So that's not a team, right? That's not healthy competition. And so of course you end up with in worst case you end up with these environments where people can't trust each other. You were just talking about trust. They can't trust each other to not act in their own self-interest and sort of take credit for your sale or your idea or something like that. So in those
Hmm.
cases, psychological safety is very low. And the root of it, if we go all the way back, are these often metric based um, incentives and goals um, that also have very, very high rewards. And that's where this whole idea where because we want to measure these things in business, right? We want to measure things like sales. We want to measure, I don't know, output, productivity, the number of cars we made on the production line, the number of patients we saw today. But there's a really interesting law called Goodhart's law,
Mm.
which came from an article on monetary policy in 1975. But what Charles Goodhart was saying was that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Right.
Yeah, right. Right, because we can measure these things, and so often when we feel these things are important, they are important. The number of patients we see in a day is important, right? But if we start to target that, if we start to set targets and incentives and goals based upon that, then what else are we impacting? What else is suffering around that team and around those people? What compromises are they making in order to achieve that target and not something else? Or are they just, is there pressure to manipulate the figures,
Right.
and actually change what we mean by patient or change what we mean by scene? All these things come
Right.
into play. And so we start to see these perverse incentives at work and these unhelpful dynamics. And then, then you've got, just like in the sales team with the very high rewards, you've got another law called Campbell's law, which is essentially states that the higher the reward, the more that metric matters, the more it matters for a team or for an individual, the more it's likely to distort the thing that you're actually trying to measure. And this, of course, so I said there are two angles to this. The other angle with respect to psychological safety is when we start to measure psychological safety, which is like super popular. Loads of people come to us asking for help to measure psychological safety, or probably more often asking for help because they've measured psychological safety and they've found something is awry. They've got some bad news they didn't want to hear or didn't expect, and it's what do we do now? Um, but of course, one of the challenges around measuring psychological safety is this of Campbell's law and Goodhart's law. How do we make sure that we're measuring psychological safety in a way that we don't damage the very thing we're trying to measure?
Yeah, and it's really the old saying, what you can measure, what matters can't be measured, and what can be measured doesn't matter, right?
Yeah,
Um, you know, it that the two laws that you just mentioned also, oftentimes what, may initially be a good measure gets perversed over time.
yeah,
And we've all seen this. And so you may have the best of intentions. And I honestly believe most people do. You have the best of intentions. You're really thoughtful about putting together the right metrics and trying to put together the right incentives. The problem is inevitably once you start to incentivize, these
mm,
sorts of things start to happen.
mm,
So what's the answer to this? I'm not sure I have an answer. It's human nature. This is what happens, and so part of the answer, I guess, without having a real answer, part of the answer is you just have to continually revisit. You have to continually examine, and you can't just rest on figuring that you've decided and determined, and therefore you are set and everything is comfortable now. You know what the metric is. That just doesn't work. Like you can't
yeah,
just be set. You have to
yeah,
continually revisit. And so I think if you're continually reflecting and revisiting and exploring and trying to understand what's the impact and unintended consequences of these metrics, that is probably going to get you closer
yeah,
to at least, you know, trying to have the type of impact that you were trying to have as you can fine tune things over time. But the
yeah.
reality is human nature, man. People, are going to pervert the types of things that you're trying to measure. And it's just the reality.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time we don't even need to set it as a goal in order for it to sort of distort what we're trying to measure. Simply measuring the thing and having that measure exist can affect people's behavior in subtle ways, right? And there's a really good example of this sort of counterintuitive effect in the world of safety. And this is super common. You'll see this everywhere, right? In fact, have have you seen, so on building sites or in factories, have you seen those signs that say
Yeah.
so many days since the last accident, right? And it will say something like 450 days. And of course, well, that's great, 450 days. But who's going to be the person that puts their hand up and says, uh, I've just cut my finger, so we need to reset that to zero? They're just going to hide. They're just going to hide the fact that they cut the finger on something, and unless it's too big to hide, they've actually lost their finger or lost an arm, they're going to hide it. Or most of the time, they're going to hide it because that pressure of just that changing that metric is so great. So a lot of what we can do involves reframing the metric just like you were saying, about what are we actually trying to achieve? And like with that metric on the wall is actually about safety. It's actually about being safe. So, and of course, how do you measure safety? This is a real challenge in the safety world. One of the ways you could do it is by reframing that sign to say, however many days since the last learning exercise we had an opportunity to run, or words to that
Hmm.
effect.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what we're doing, what we're trying to do is reward people for speaking up with ideas or a mistake or a near miss or an accident that has an opportunity to learn from, and so we can prevent them in the future. We don't want to suppress the information. We don't want to suppress finding out about accidents. We want to hear about them. So we have to make sure that we're not incentivizing the wrong thing because usually with any metric, right, we're measuring a proxy for the actual thing we're trying to measure because it's so hard to measure good outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's just so tough. And it's the conundrum because, we always say in business, that if you want to if you want to change something, or if you want to motivate something, or what you measure is what gets noticed, right?
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah,
I mean, if you're not measuring it, if it's not a goal, if you don't attach an incentive to it, the employees aren't going to pay attention to it, and that's just the reality. You can talk about it all day long, the CEO, the C-suite, all the way down. You can have really great communication channels, and you can espouse values. You can do all those sorts of things, and you can have
mm,
great
mm,
signage around the company, and you can say all the right things, but it's whatever you end up putting the incentives behind. It's whatever you end up establishing goals around, and whatever the performance metrics are. Those are the things people pay attention to. It just
yeah,
is.
yeah,
um and a lot of times in a lot of organizations, the two actually don't line up very well. So you'll have a whole
yeah,
bunch of espoused values, and then you'll have like incentives, and they don't actually line up. That's a
yeah,
problem, right? But let's
yeah,
say
yeah,
they do line up. Let's say they actually do
yeah,
line up. The problem is, over time, you have this creep that happens where these incentives that initially lined up with the values start to have these unintended consequences. They
mm,
start to
mm,
diverge, like, yeah. And it's just the way it goes. From the C-suite perspective, from the leadership perspective, all they want is to influence behavior. All they want to do is to
yeah,
try to get the types of outcomes that are going to drive business success. So if we know that any sort of metric, eventually, because of human nature, it's going to cause this kind of divergence, it's going to cause perverse behaviors.
mm,
It's human nature. What's the alternative? Like, what can we do as a leader? If I'm running a team, what can I how can I approach this in a way that at least increases the chance of me not having that kind of an outcome? Like, I think of, for example, the I don't know if you're familiar with this case, but the State Farm, sorry, not State Farm, the bank, darn it, I'm blanking on the name. And I
no, but I know the one you
apologize,
mean.
State Farm. I apologize, State Farm, for saying State Farm when it wasn't State Farm. Um, um,
But I know the one you mean, where they're incentivizing, they're incentivized this sort of applications for mortgages, was it, or
yeah,
loans?
it was bank accounts. So there are all
Yeah,
these
exactly.
fraudulent bank accounts. This was just a few
Yes.
years ago. And there was a US bank. And I don't think anyone ever said to all of these lower level employees, create all of these fraudulent bank accounts, right?
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
ever said that. There was no internal memo saying create fraudulent bank accounts. But because of all these, the way they incentivized everything, from the lower level employees all the way up through middle management, bonus structures, all this kind of stuff, what ended up happening is like so many fraudulent bank accounts. And they
Mm.
kept on opening up new and new and new bank accounts in customers' names. And it was just a shell game, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's exactly the type of I mean, this was an extreme example, but this is the type of thing that can happen. One, when you don't have checks and balances in place, and two, when you have a high demand, high performance kind of culture,
Mm.
with incentives that are, with high levels of expectations, and you have otherwise good meaning well-intentioned people, good people, that all of a sudden start doing bad stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there's a great term in the sort of psychological safety realm called the normalization of deviance,
Yeah,
which comes from the Challenger disaster, right? The of 1986, and is all to do with how in NASA they started to sort of just tolerate just the fact that these rubber O-rings weren't it couldn't contain gases at lower temperatures and became brittle. That just became a
yeah,
normal thing. It became okay, because it was repeatedly okay. It was always okay in the past. Thus, it'll be okay in the future. And so, this sort of behavior that we see incentivized by, let's say, production pressure to get the space shuttle in the sky, or production pressure, or it's metric pressure to get as many people signed up for bank account as possible. And of course, if we in an organization, if we see other people doing it, we're we're good people. It's just like you said, we're good people. Everyone we can assume everyone means well. But if everyone around us is doing it, we're probably going to start doing the same thing. And then it becomes a bit too big of a snowball to actually manage and for someone to speak up and say, "Oh, we've got 500,000 bank accounts that aren't real here." No, because no one wants to be that person, right? No one wants to, that's a psychological safety thing. No one wants to be that one because good things don't happen to that person.
yeah, yeah. Yep. And then you have all the stuff around whistleblowers and all that kind of stuff,
Mm,
right?
mm.
So the bottom line is, I don't think there's any like super easy answers to any of this, but you do put mechanisms in place to try to
Yeah,
make it difficult for those sorts of deviant behaviors to occur, right? You try to make sure that there's regular um, reflection back on like what these incentives are, how
yeah,
they're what the metrics are, how they're being calculated, like how they're, are they actually accomplishing what you want them to accomplish?
yeah,
Unless those conversations are happening on a regular basis, then inevitably you're going to have divergence.
yeah,
And I don't know about you, but I don't hear, like, in the organizations I work with, I don't see or hear those types of conversations happening very often. It's like they make a determination, it's set and pretty much
yeah,
set in stone, and then
yeah,
they just move forward.
yeah.
And so the divergence will happen and it never gets revisited. And then all of a sudden you're 5 years down the road and you're like way apart, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so we talk about a few strategies to try and mitigate this. And one is, the first one is exactly that, like revisit these metrics and measures really often to check that they are actually still aligned with the thing you're trying to achieve. Um, Another one that is so we talk about metrics all the time. So in business and in organizations all over the world, there's a seduction of metrics and numbers.
Yeah.
We're the simplicity and supposed objectivity of numbers and metrics really appeal to us, particularly as we go higher up in organizations. But there's real power to qualitative measures, right? Things that aren't numbers, things that are feelings and words and experiences and outcomes. And of course, these are harder to measure. They're harder to put on a PowerPoint slide. They're harder to do a quick NPS score of or something, right? But they're really, really powerful, and they tell us actually what's going on in the organization rather than just some score that could be, like you say, diverging from where it should be. Um, Another thing is, like, fundamentally, people in an organization should find it easier and more rewarding to improve the system they're in rather than game it. And that's fundamentally, we're talking about a cultural thing. Just back to this sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
normalization of deviance and loads of application forms. If it was easier for someone to say this metric is broken and it's resulting in this bad thing happening, then I mean, I know, yes, that's a hard thing to do, but that's why we're here, right? That's what we're trying to achieve in organizations. It's hard, but it's so important. It's crucial for people to be able to speak up about ideas to improve the system, concerns about where the system is going wrong, and to point out metrics that are having a perverse incentive.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Tom, this has just been a really fun conversation. I know we've
Hmm.
only scratched the surface. There's so much more that we could talk about. But I also note the time. I need to let you go and get on with your day. It's evening for you. I'm sure you have lots of plans tonight. Before I let you go, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, John. Yeah, so we have a website called psychsafety.com. And yeah, if you want to head over there, then we have a newsletter you can sign up to. We have loads of action packs and toolkits and resources you can download. We have an online community you can join, open online meetups that you can join and sign up to and get involved in. We have workshops and training and loads of other things, a load of stuff I've probably forgotten about. So basically head there for your like one-stop shop for psychological safety, and email me at tom@psychsafety.com if there's anything else you want to talk about or get involved in.
Awesome. Awesome. Tom, thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Tom can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.